Hey everyone, this is Andy Hall. You're watching a special interview with Monica L. Miller. Who is Monica L. Miller? I'm glad you asked, audience. She is the legal director and senior counsel at the American Humanist Association. Appignani? Thank you, Humanist Legal Center and executive director of the Humanist Legal Society. Since joining the AHA in 2012, Miller has vigorously defended the constitutional mandate of separation of church and state by litigating Establishment Clause cases across the country. Miller has appeared live on Fox News and MSNBC, as well as local TV stations and radio shows, and is regularly quoted by national and local media outlets throughout the country, including Fox News, NPR, ABC, NBC, Aljazeera, USA Today, Newsweek, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the National Law Journal, among many others. Mind you, everyone, this is a truncated resume. I am going to touch on something here towards the end. In pursuit of her concern for fundamental rights, Miller is also an attorney for the Non-Human Rights Project, the NHRP, working to obtain common law personhood rights. Oh, that sounds like magic. For non-human animals. Miller's work at the NHRP has captured the interest of the world's leading legal scholars, scientists, and journalists. She is also featured in the HBO documentary Unlocking the Cage. Oh, my fictitious God, Monica Miller. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack, so much I didn't read, and I think we should just jump in.
Sure.
Okay, so for people who are just tuning in, who might have just found this on YouTube search, what is humanism?
So I define humanism sort of through our motto, more or less, which is you can be good without a God. We all have different ways we find humanism. Frankly, a lot of us found humanism later in life. And I'm still encountering who I would consider humanists, at my age, that are, have been to grad school and whatnot, that are like, I've never heard of humanism. And after about a sentence or two, it's like, oh, I might even be a humanist. But yeah, it's the idea, Jefferson's Bible kind of aligns with this too. It's the idea of taking some core, values and lessons from science and ethics and human experience and applying those to sort of achieve, the greater good for humanity, and humanity, including nature and animals and everything else that's sort of in the cosmos.
Sure. And for people who are just tuning in and don't know what the American Humanist Association is, what kind of work do they do?
Yes, so we are a national nonprofit organization. We've been based out of DC for quite some time. Founded in the 1940s, we are the nation's oldest and largest humanist organization. And we are an activist type of group that has a lot of different tentacles and programs and adjuncts and chapters and affiliates. We do have chapters and affiliates in almost every state. We do grassroots organizing. We do lobbying and legislation stuff. We my department is the legal department, so we bring separation of church and state cases. We don't necessarily have a ton of overlap with all of the groups or all the different departments within our organization, but we meet regularly with them anyways. So yeah, we do a lot of activism for humanists and free thinkers, and we've been ramping up our social justice work, and yeah.
Let's say that we were in an elevator together. And I started talking to you, what do I do for work? I make widgets at the widget factory.
Yeah.
If we were in an elevator for, maybe 30 seconds, I say, well, what do you do, Monica?
I would say I'm an attorney. I fight injustices both to humans and to non-humans, if I were to summarize it.
Interesting. So I'm going to jump ahead right now because I have this as like question 7 on my list, but the Non-Human Rights Project and common law personhood rights. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. So it's actually the reason I went to law school was to pursue a career in animal rights. And I, from a young age, had an awareness that animals didn't have rights. For a while, I might have conflated welfare and rights, which is pretty much everyone does these days. Either there's camps of people who think animals already have all these rights. We've got, statutes that say you can't kick your dog. But the reality is all animals in our country, absent some nuance with some statutes that we're arguing confer personhood upon animals, they're all legal things. In the same way that a pen is a thing with no inherent rights, no legally enforceable right. And so with that, you can kill an animal, you can imprison an animal, and that's the focus of our group, is actually seeking the right to bodily liberty, the right to be free from physical restraint. That with, if this were like a human child, so our clients are highly sentient species, elephants, chimpanzees, that imprisoning them violates their autonomy and their bodily liberty in the same way that it would, in an analogous way, with like a human child, from the cognition and intelligence and autonomy standpoint. So we work in a bunch of different disciplines. We have scientists, we have experts from around the globe, hailing from all different disciplines, philosophy, primatology, we've got a lot of neuroscience, a lot on just autonomy. Jane Goodall is one of our board members. So we're really immersed in the science. This isn't just flippant PR stunt. This has been a calculated project that we started. My boss started it, the concepts of it long ago, and we really started ramping our litigation up in 2013, right around when I got out of law school. Sure.
Talk to me about the moment that you decided that you were going to go into the animal rights business, I guess.
Yeah, I would honestly say like young. And I sometimes it's funny when you kind of people who were like, I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't. Law, it was very apparent to me by the time I was in college that I think I wanted to be an animal cop for a while. I mean, I know I did, because I watched that on the Animal Planet when I was growing up. It happened to be a woman, and I think that makes a big difference to young girls. But I remember watching Animal Planet, and this woman would go and she had her police outfit on and she'd go save these dogs. But my concerns weren't just relating to dogs. I was really concerned with circuses. When we were kids, we'd drive down on the 5 freeway and I'd see Harris Ranch, which I consider a version of like a Cowschwitz. I mean, it's back to back to back cows and they're all going to a slaughterhouse. And from a young age, it really just traumatized me. I became a vegetarian. My entire sort of career trajectory was through the lens of animals. There was no like animal major, but I did environmental studies, got my master's degree in environmental science and policy, with kind of always focusing on wildlife or any sort of tension between those seeking animal rights and caring about the individual animal versus environmentalists. And so anyways, that's been my passion. And then church-state separation felt like another niche that kind of fell into my lap. But I've been actively kind of staying in the animal rights field too.
How did your parents respond when you said, I think I'm going to go into this animal rights, this lucrative animal rights business? Yeah,
they honestly, I mean, they were the kind of parents that actually did say like, I would be a lawyer. It's funny because my parents aren't lawyers, but I did argue a lot. And I know it's very cliche and a lot of lawyers are like, my parents said that, but I didn't, it was sort of just a thing they were saying. So when it was, maybe my 3rd year in college and I was like, I think I should do animal law. I must have read it. I mean, it was very new then. I mean, like the concept of animal law isn't new, but like there was only 3 law schools in the country at the time, I think, that even had 1 course on animal law. But I knew I wanted to get animals' rights, and the law is how you change, being a lawyer is how you change and shape law. So it was like amazing to be a first year in law school, go to an animal law conference out in Portland, find this guy who's now my boss, giving a lecture. At the time he was a professor, just giving a lecture on his project that he was starting and looking for volunteers for, that happened to be proposing to actually do animal rights, like get animals actual legal rights enforceable in a court. And that was like precisely why I went to law school. So I really, being at the right place and the right time can't be understated. And then also I reached out to the guy and he didn't respond to my first email. I waited a year in between. Then he's like, oh, you're fantastic. Thank you for asking. I was like, I actually reached out a year ago. And he's like, I must have missed your email. So it's really important to like follow up. Because you might miss an opportunity by someone else's just, he probably was flooded with emails. So
definitely. That's great advice, by the way.
Yeah.
Being tenacious and polite at the same time.
That's for sure.
So common law, in fighting for common law personhood rights, is that basically mean going through the courts and creating a precedent?
Correct. So we're not using statutes. We're not relying on, Congress or state legislature to change. I mean, we have a component that's doing a little bit of that, but our focus is using the common law, the judge-made law, and we're basing it off of precedent. We're basing it off of a lot of different type of precedent, but a lot of the precedent comes out of cases where other entities have not been considered legal persons and then are. And a lot of those cases happen to be black slave cases where they were actually using the exact same mechanism, the writ of habeas corpus, before they were legally recognized as legal persons. And the concept of legal personhood is a fiction. As we know, corporations are legal persons. We've had many, humans and persons are not synonymous. We've had many points in history where humans were not legal persons. Like I mentioned, black slavery, there was a time where married women were considered the chattel of their husbands. Children, in some respects, are treated in a kind of, and the law used to more so, but especially if they were in orphanages and stuff, but not have a full legal kind of recognition. In India and other countries now, they're recognizing more animals, but as well as like idols, rivers, glaciers, all sorts of non-human entities that are being accorded legal personhood, that is giving them a legal right that can be enforced.
Interesting. So are there certain states that are easier to argue these cases in?
Oh my God, I love that question, because some of the research that I worked on, I mean, this was a small group. So I was one of the first employees at the time, but before that, when I was in law school, I was doing the volunteer work with this group of maybe 10 law students across the country. And the research we were focused on was picking the ideal state to bring this case in. And and our focus was doing state by state research projects. We would look at different kind of things that we knew were going to be important to our case. Like, how do they look at common law equality? How do they look at habeas corpus? Is it considered common law? Because there's some states that actually consider habeas corpus now to be almost a completely statutory remedy, in which case we would have a very difficult time arguing that the animal qualifies as a person under a statute that takes away the common law. Because it's like, well, the California legislature clearly didn't intend for the animal to be covered by this statute because they just enacted it, whatever that may be. We wanted a state where it was clear that the common law was still recognized, where the judges had a lot of flexibility in shaping and molding the common law, because the common law needs to be kept up with the times. And judges are duty bound, because they're the ones creating their laws. They're duty bound to reevaluate the law, the precedent that they set out. And when it's challenged as being arcane and out of step with the times, out of step with the science, out of step with what we know about animals, they're duty bound. They have a judicial obligation, not only to both to look at the case, but then also to change the law if it doesn't match up. If there's a big, gap between how we're treating a vegetative state human, and they got all of the rights, and a sentient chimpanzee who can communicate in our language. I can't speak chimpanzee, but there's plenty of great apes that can speak our language. I think that's quite impressive, just as I do someone, where English is their second language in a law school. I'm always like, that person's really impressive to me. So, that all being said, it's the common law is the reason why, the state by state thing was important for us.
I don't know if this is a secret or not, if you can answer this, but what state are you targeting, or what state seems to be the most friendly in terms of animal rights?
So in terms of animal rights and in terms of the best state for our case, they're not the same. In fact, because I was the one proposing the original 5 states, just based off of the facts, what we know of the law, of habeas corpus and this, that, and the other. And some of them were Missouri or something. I don't think Missouri was on the list, but states where you would be well, we're just not going to win there tomorrow on behalf of an elephant. There's humans that still are suffering immensely in some of these states. So we ended up choosing New York. That's the first state we filed in, and it ended up being, and we still actually have, we ended up filing several of our cases there because we kept getting little nuggets, and that's sort of how the common law works. We never expected to go in and win our first case. What we hoped for was some judicial, some suggestions along the way that would kind of get built into precedent, and that's how the common law works, is a few judges. And so we've now since had several judges, including a judge on the highest court in New York, the New York Court of Appeals, who have written about what we're doing and see great merit in it. The Court of Appeals judge wrote a separate concurrence about how, we really do need to look at this group's case. They're, chimpanzees, that was our chimpanzee case. Chimpanzees are autonomous. Like, why are we treating them so differently? I mean, he raised a lot of these questions that we're raising. And so now the Court of Appeals of New York has taken our case. And this case is on behalf of Happy, the elephant, who has been confined in the Bronx Zoo.
Tell me about Happy the elephant.
Happy the elephant is not happy. We have a ton of information about her on our website. I don't want to misstate any of our facts, but she's been living alone for a long time. And our goal is to get the court to recognize Happy's bodily liberty. She was brought in with other elephants, Asian elephants, that were named other Snow White characters. Like, it was like Grumpy. I'm trying to remember. Like,
there's a whole slew of dwarf elephants out there.
Yeah, and so the whole thing is really sad, and it kind of is one of those things that just keeps getting sadder as we see the situation, with the pandemic and everything. There was tigers getting COVID at the Bronx Zoo where Happy is. I don't know. It's just, the whole thing has been really, it's very sad to see an elephant, a species that's also social like us in this sort of forced isolation. I was hoping that the pandemic and all of our own individual experiences with greater isolation would, and maybe it has set a stage for some more empathy for these caged animals. And maybe that's why the Court of Appeals finally has caved and is agreeing to listen to our case. But I do hope people reflect on, we as a social species and how much we've suffered from this. It's the same for a lot of these animals. They're suffering by confinement.
Right. I had Professor Nathan Lentz on this channel, and he wrote a book about animal behavior and human morality, about the evolution of human morality with our primate and other animal cousins. Mm-hmm. And of course, you must know Phil Zuckerman, coming from Pittsburgh. Yeah, right. And so I've talked with Phil's been on this channel too a couple of times, talking about his book about morality, about his work with morality and non-human species too. And when you look at the data, it's difficult. I would say, I'm biased, of course. I'd say it's impossible to look at the data and say that animals shouldn't be given rights.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I would agree.
Yeah. So what does a day at work look like for you? Is there a typical day?
So it's now, everything's been different since I moved back. I'm in California now, but I was in DC for the bulk of my time with the American Humanist Association. And I do split my time with the two organizations, the American Humanist Association and the Non-Human Rights Project. I do the Non-Human Rights Project more on Thursdays and Fridays, whatever. But the day in the life is waking up and, checking my emails, making sure we don't have any immediate court deadlines. When we do, I'm full force, can't really respond to a lot of emails, just writing briefs. Sometimes, usually when we've had deadlines, because we are a one lawyer show, we've had other periods where we have two lawyers. We're about to hire a new staff attorney, but I have to be really judicious with my time because, writing a court brief can be very taxing, and we get incoming complaints. So usually my paralegal Izzy will let us know what's on the docket and what I've got to do. And I don't know, it's probably not that different from other lawyers. It's just the content of what I'm doing is different, maybe. Sure.
I'm sure you've heard this before by some people who may not be humanists. But, the separation of church and state, the wall of church and state, that's not even in the Constitution.
Yeah. Yeah, we do get that a lot. A lot of things. First of all, it is. I mean, the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And that language has been interpreted to mean by the framers, by those who authored it, by Thomas Jefferson, the author of the First Amendment with James Madison, that he was unequivocal that this means the separation of church and state, which he wrote in a letter to the Baptist organization, the Danbury Baptist. We know this also because of the words that were chosen. The metaphor could not exist, and we'd still be having the same rule, which is the government can't be enmeshing itself in religion. They chose a word that was intentionally broad, respecting an establishment of religion. Respecting is a broad word. It's not just you can't put up a church, Congress. It's you can't do things respecting an establishment of religion. And they don't say church either. They say religion, which is also an intentionally broad word. And if you go back to the history, and you can read a lot about the legislative history. I'll do a little plug for my friend Andrew Seidel, who has a great book, The Founding Myth. The history is unequivocal that this means what it means, which is that the government and religion in our country do not do well when they're together, as we've seen from other countries, and that the intention of our framers was to keep them separate. Right.
A lot of people on the other side who aren't aware of the history of church-state entanglement don't realize that Europe bled itself white with religious religious wars.
Exactly. I mean, it doesn't take much to notice it in other countries. Like, it still happens. There was a good concurrence. I want to say it was by Justice O'Connor, but it was one of these pivot points where, like, our opponents tried to do in all of our cases, but they try to weaken the wall, not just through opposing what we're challenging, but through saying the precedent should be overturned, that we don't need this lemon test, the structure by which these cases are measured. Do away with that. Just go with this very literal interpretation that it means you can't put up a church, Congress, which we don't interpret the other provisions of our Constitution so narrowly. Like, it doesn't say you have a right to bear a machine gun. Like, it doesn't say. There's a lot of terms, the right to privacy, things that we hear a lot of from folks on the other side of that aisle, proclaiming some rights, and I'm not sure where they even found them in the Constitution. Like, where does that come from? What are they talking about? So this is right there, the First Amendment. But yeah, it is definitely it's definitely unfortunate that they go after the precedent and try to overrule it. But this one justice was saying, just all you need to do is look at these other countries. Why would you trade a system that's worked so well for us so far? We haven't had religious wars with one that's served others so poorly. Why get rid of this church? Why are they so hell-bent, pun intended, on getting rid of something that is designed ultimately to protect religion as much as government? It's intended to protect the integrity of those institutions. So for that reason, it's really not an atheist state. It's the stake should be held by Christians, saying we want church-state separation to protect our religion from government interference. But instead, they're like, give us money, give us this, give us privilege.
I have used the same argument with theists concerning, if the state gets into your business, then it's going to tell you what to do.
There's always strings attached. There's no free lunch. And the administrations change too, right? Like, they could be all excited to get some Trump funds or something, but they're not even, and it's not to say that there's sort of this political, like, I don't believe that there's Democrats that are like, now we'll screw the other side. But I mean, I'm sure there are. I just mean, like, I don't feel like it's a real concern they should hold, but I still feel like it's a little short-sighted to think that just because one administration's being favorable to you, that's gonna hold, and that, once you get that fund from one administration, that the next year is not going to come with a lot of other strings.
Well, Monica, you brought up Trump. I think it would only be fair to say, hey, what was your life like as a lawyer fighting for humanism during the Trump administration? I
mean, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, we could begin with the fact that it wasn't until Trump's appointee Kavanaugh was seated or sworn in that they took our Cross case. The Supreme Court granted Justice Kennedy probably wasn't that forth. They only need 4 votes to have a case taken by the Supreme Court. And we won our case in the Fourth Circuit challenging this large cross on government property. There's no reason the Supreme Court should have taken this case. There was no conflict with other courts. This was a classic win. This government cross violates the Constitution. And our opponents brought it to the Supreme Court. They kept moving it off the calendar. What are they waiting for? Oh, gee, I don't know, maybe Trump's judge. So then, and I'm not that cynical. Like I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I'm not usually someone that's like, oh, it's because this one guy. But when you look at what Kennedy said about crosses, where he was at, what they were waiting, who Kavanaugh is and what he symbolizes. So it started with just taking my case. And then I had to redo my plans because my plans were to like house hunt and like kind of settle out in California before like getting heavy into work again. I mean, I was still working, but instead I had to kind of drop everything, prep for this case. Then I had another cross case pending in the 11th Circuit, which I'd also won. And because of the Bladensburg Cross case, and then a new Trump appointee, who was serving like this was his first case, was another cross case. He was very eager to take the irrelevant facts from one case and apply them to another. And there's no way we would have lost in a pre-Trump. I mean, I won in a district court where the judge was not only very conservative, Bush-appointed judge, he was on the Pensacola JCs that put up the cross, and he was responsible for putting up the challenge monument, and I still won with him. So it's like, it should tell you something that the judges and justices that Trump appointed have an immediate and personal impact on my career, as well as on the state of separation of church and state. Now we're all waiting anxiously for the Fulton decision to come down, which we think it's going to come down tomorrow. And we get to learn what Trump's appointees think about whether or not religions get a free pass for discriminating and violating laws that otherwise apply to society.
Talk to me about the Fulton case. What does it entail?
So the Fulton case, just in a nutshell, what we're concerned with is almost less so the facts of that particular case, which involve contracts for adoption agencies, and I think foster care and adoption, but the principle would apply to both, and whether religious groups that have these contracts can discriminate against same-sex couples. The reason why this is a very concerning case is because on the chopping block is the rule, a principle, like something that is almost like so basic and necessary for church-state separation, but it comes out of this case we call the Smith case, the Smith test, that is the idea that neutral laws of general applicability apply to religious groups and non-religious groups the same. Like you don't, if it's a neutral law of general applicability, like you cannot discriminate against, on the basis of sex or race or anything else, then, whether or not your religious organization should matter. But now we might be saying, well, religion trumps equality. Religion's going to trump these other laws. And as we've seen in the shadow docket cases of the COVID church restriction cases, I'm starting to feel like they're basically giving churches a license to kill. At what point are they going to be exempt from murder? It's like, it's very unsettling knowing how these Supreme Court justices rule.
Religious liberty to me, and I'm just a layperson, religious liberty to me just sounds like religious supremacy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In today's world, it is. I should caveat this by saying there's a lot of well-meaning and wonderful Christian organizations, including the folks that were on our side in the Bladensburg Cross case. We had a lot of Christian groups and churches on our side, Methodists, like the big Methodist group, Seventh-day Adventists, I think, the Baptists, of course, the Baptists, the Joint Baptist Committee in D.C., Holly Hallman was out there on the front steps with us humanists, even though they're very Baptist, because for the same reason we talked about earlier, they said that we understand the value of church-state separation and all the ways that it protects the integrity of our religion. And what the government's doing in this case, in my case, is telling everyone the cross means something that they're saying it doesn't mean. The government's saying the cross is just a bland World War I symbol that's used to honor all veterans regardless of their religion or non-religion. And I argued, and they agreed, that no, it does not represent Jews. It doesn't represent atheists. Go to Arlington. Do you see crosses over Jewish fallen soldiers, or do you see Stars of David? It's like, it's so offensive. And luckily, we have principled Christians that are on our side, that are starting to get, I think, hopefully more vocal and hopefully more numerous, that realize this affects them maybe even to a greater degree than us. So, I don't it's not all the Christians, but at the same time, they are a lot of them that it's a privilege that they're looking for, or that they're not grasping that's what this is. It's yeah.
Right. I feel like I triggered you with that whole Trump thing.
Oh my God. I'm glad it's over-ish. I mean, there's all the residual stuff, but
over-ish. I like how you framed that.
It could have been worse, I guess, but the lasting effects are all these justices and judges.
Right. For people who aren't in law, how many judges, I'm not even talking about Supreme Court judges, did Trump get into the judiciary?
I honestly don't know. And it's funny because it's not funny, but around the time of the insurrection and all of that other, I just was I will filter the news that I kind of need to know for work, but I feel like I saw the number and maybe it just shocked my conscience. Whatever it is, I don't have an association with that number, and there might be a reason, because I don't thing, but I think I just really didn't want to know. I wasn't in a place to find out the damage he did. After RBG died, I was just I don't know what I can handle right now.
I totally understand that. You have to be able to manage the stress and the news in little pieces, because otherwise you're just going to be overwhelmed.
Exactly. And I can't be an effective advocate when I'm crying because Ruth Bader Ginsburg died and she's being replaced with someone who is against women's rights. Decidedly in some ways, the whole thing is so, it's very sad. And, but that is another, again, me giving some pointers out there to whoever's listening. One is, if you're working, because I've done this, I worked for the same two organizations since law school when I graduated in 2012. So about 10 years at each one. And, one's dealing with animal, suffering, and the other is dealing with a lot of constitutional violations and social rights and social justice things that we see out the other stuff. It is exhausting mentally and emotionally, and especially when you feel like you make some traction and then it kind of gets wiped out by an administration. And so it's vital to when you feel like you've had too much news, or if you're just I'm not even going to remember this, or it's just, this isn't, it's to do that so you don't get burnt out, because we need more folks here fighting with us. And we all do, because I think we do come with a little bit more sensitivity to the world, those that want to work in these fields. And then that comes with more, getting upset when these things happen. And then also the flip side is, if you start not getting upset about it, you almost get desensitized, which is what we don't want to see either, because you can't really do a good job if you don't care about it. So it's a lot of nuance in these professions that people kind of overlook.
This is true. I've had a couple of people from Extinction Rebellion on the channel, and I've chatted with Xeon Lights, who was over in Britain and heading the public face of Extinction Rebellion for a while. And they really seem to focus on feeling the feelings that you need to feel, which can be difficult at times. And that helps you from being desensitized.
Yes, it does. It does. I didn't realize it was going to be I wasn't really braced for RBG dying anyways, but I was certainly not braced for that. And I got really weird about it. I've never made a shrine, but I just didn't know what to do, and so I just cobbled my little RBG stuff together and lit a candle and just had my own little humanist seance or something. I didn't know how to process that, but I knew I had to, because I had to show up for work. I was bawling when I read Nina Totenberg's piece on RBG, I think probably the day after she passed, but knowing how close the two were. I had spoken with Nina a lot during the Cross case, and she was one of Nina Totenberg's kind of final things to me, maybe the day before the case, was like, are you so excited to meet RBG? And it was like, yes. It was sort of this collective experience as a woman, even though this is her friend that she's kind of referring to, like, she knows my energy is so excited to meet this icon of, you know, who's paved the way, and not just because she's a Supreme Court justice who is a woman. As we know, Sandra Day O'Connor was the first Supreme Court justice who was a woman. It's what the cases she brought. It's the obstacles she faced. It's how she's handled herself and becoming friends with Scalia, who's on the other side. Every aspect of this woman to me is as close to a god as one could become. And, you know, anyways, I read Nina's piece and just thought, oh my gosh, like what this woman had to do to get her shit together to write something, you know, cogent and thoughtful, and like, after her friend and an icon died, I just was like, well, I need to toughen up a little too. Like, because it's not even my friend. She's not my friend. So, you know, it is, but, and I'm sure Nina's probably does all sorts of things to keep herself sane, and everyone else in DC that's still functioning. There's got to be method to their madness, lots of meditation or workouts or something.
Right. Everyone has to find their way. Find their way to get through grief and how to get through the day-to-day stress.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's your proudest moment working with the AHA?
I mean, there's a few. I mean, I have to say the Bladensburg Cross case, only because I put so much into it. I was up against, it was a very David and Goliath situation. You know, one female attorney. I think we know I'm one of the youngest attorneys to have argued, youngest female attorneys to argue, but might even be in a ballpark of, you know, I was 33, I think, at the time. But it wasn't that. It was like, kind of like not letting myself, you know, not letting the imposter syndrome get to the best of me, like knowing I'm going up against the United States government, like one of the biggest partners, one of the biggest firms in DC. And then Neil Katyal, who's actually like sympathetic to our side in terms of like where he normally stands, but was representing Maryland in large part, I think, to protect the same test that I wanted to protect. He kind of comes into these cases as like middle person. Anyways, though, these were all extremely experienced litigators, Neil being, I think, one of the people that's argued the most Supreme Court cases. And my goal in the case was not to win, because we knew there was no winning. This is the Kavanaugh court, but was to prevent the court from overturning the Lemon test and all the precedent that our opponents were trying to get them to throw away. And that was very, just like we're kind of on pins and needles with Fulton, felt very likely that the court could say this Lemon test is gone, and in all respects, and in this case, and all that. So they didn't do that, and I kind of felt like that alone was a victory. I felt proud of my case, you know, what I presented. I got a lot of extremely overwhelmingly positive feedback from people I've looked up to in the field. So like that kind of reinforced feeling proud. But yeah, and I think I would just say like the kind of the quantity and outcome of the cases that I have done, I think considering we've always, you know, I've been the main person litigating AHA's cases since I graduated in 2012. We've had different legal directors, but they've always given me full reign for almost for the most part with litigation. And so like for me to look back and be like, I've done like 30 federal establishment clause cases, and I've argued in these circuits, and kind of when you were rattling that off, like, I'm like, oh yeah, I did do that. Like, so sometimes I have these little moments when I almost like can like put it in a chunk, but I honestly don't probably do enough of that, and that probably would help the well-being side of things to like remind myself of what I've done, because it just like, again, you feel like you're part of the movement, and when you see so much backsliding and other things at stake like Roe versus Wade, it's like, you know, it's hard to feel really proud you've accomplished something when you haven't accomplished the thing, which is church and state being separate.
Right. You know, it's interesting that you mentioned about how that case wasn't a zero-sum game, that you were looking not to win, but to preserve some key aspects. Yeah. And I never thought of it like that before.
And it's a strategy that has real like nuance to it, because if I'm trying to win, I'm going to be spending a lot of my space like arguing why this cross meets these tests and this and that. But instead I focus, because you only get so many words too, like in your briefs. So it's not like I can write all the things on all of it. It's like, I'm going to shift my focus to defending the tests and almost saying, screw my case. Like, you know, okay, like almost conceding things, and not even conceding, but getting them to see that like, you can make a really narrow ruling. Yes, this is a 100-year-old cross. Like maybe make it the age that you're going to hang your hat on. You know, I still argued that this cross is extremely unconstitutional, all those reasons, but trying to like separate it out so that they could end up just saying this one cross is allowed. And that's kind of exactly what we have, is this one cross, and then some dictum about, you know, whether age matters and some other stuff, you know, the war factor, but it can be narrowly interpreted. So,
right. What's your proudest moment working for animal rights?
You know, that one is interesting too. I feel like we've had some really wonderful highlights. I'd have to say, like, meeting Jane Goodall, who's been my like the only, because I don't idealize people. I don't have gods. I don't really care about celebrity culture. There's not, but Jane Goodall was someone when I was in 3rd grade, because I've always, like I said, I've always loved animals and really cared about them in a way that wasn't just like, I want them as pets. And we were asked to do like a Day of the Dead. I went to Catholic school in California, but we had some like more Spanish influences and stuff. And it was like, do a shrine of someone that's important. And I didn't realize Jane Goodall was still living, because I just saw her in a National Geographic, you know, and I just loved what she did from what I saw. And so I cut her out, and my teacher was like, you know, Jane Goodall's still living. And I was like, oh my God, no one told me this. So I like failed the assignment. But anyway, so I met Jane Goodall right after my Supreme Court case, like 2 months after we hosted. So it was kind of this feeling of, again, like we made it, like going from this small group that we met in this hotel room, strategizing for this animal rights case, to now having LA co-host an event with us for Jane Goodall's birthday, and have Jane Goodall stand there. Steve, my boss, introduced Jane to me, who I've seen speak at one other thing a long time ago, but as this woman who just argued her first Supreme Court case and in front of RBG. And then Jane's like, oh my gosh, that's so wonderful. And, you know, just this feeling of like, oh my gosh, like it was so incredible. And it made me feel like, you know, like all the hard work, all of the, you know, hours and hours and late nights doing all this research in law school, it all had this moment of like, even if we lost every case, I met Jane Goodall.
You know, you mentioned about being a humanist, about not building up idols, not worshiping idols. And I just think it's a logical transition to Professor Richard Dawkins.
My thoughts?
You know, a little, you know, for those people who don't know about the background of Professor Dawkins, and if you don't feel comfortable talking about this, you do not have to. We can just edit this section out.
I can share a few things. I mean, okay. I would say that it's a mistake. I look at like idealizing people, like I said, is generally a mistake. I would assume Jane Goodall is not all good. You know, like she's probably made some choices. Like we all make mistakes and bad choices. I think that's the problem of overly idealizing people, is it puts a ton of pressure on them. And like, then every word they say. So I'm prefacing this by saying that I look at humans as just like flawed, and I sort of almost expect less of people. Mm-hmm. So like when I saw that tweet, I was not even surprised, like, which maybe says something about my views of Dawkins. I read his works in Phil Zuckerman's class in college. And like his book might have been one of the main books, The God Delusion, that propelled me into a field of separation from church and state. So I don't know how I'd feel, say, like if Phil plucked that book without, you know, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? I'm not a master on this. I feel like one could say this is a person that said this, that, and the other, but here are some chapters that, you know, for instance, are salient to this, or maybe finding substitutions. Like, I don't know, but it's really hard. It's very difficult. I mean, and it's incredibly difficult. And I'm not a trans person. I'm not someone that was a target of his thing. And I have trans friends, and it breaks my heart. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's nothing that excuses someone antagonizing people, which is what he did. So it's not like I just, you know, it's like I support my organization and the choices we've made. I just feel like my own heart gets broken when these things happen, because it sucks. And it's like, why can't we just not suck and, like, you know, not antagonize? And if you really want to make like a scientific point, if you have a scientific point to make, then make it in an appropriately scientific way. And really, like, if that's what he was trying to do, which wasn't, there was nothing there. So That's speaking in the abstracts, but that's just my feeling is it's combined heartbreak and confusion, and also at the same time not being that surprised. Yeah.
I personally have found it easier to work with liberal theists than conservative atheists.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny you say that because I really love that. Well, like I mentioned my friend Holly Hallman at the Joint Baptist committee, but she's such a, I don't know, like there's something about, maybe because they're used to like some church kind of sermonizing, but there's something about the way that when she was speaking, I'm like, there's like a, I don't know what it is, but I do feel like we get lost in, our field gets lost in like nuance and picking fights and like almost wanting to debate. Like wanting to debate, and I feel like religion kind of centers around like wanting to worship, or like wanting, like, of course the religion we're seeing in the conservative side is the antagonizing, like bring it on kind of religion. But there are a lot of religion, like, progressive theists who are out there, who are earnest in their beliefs and not trying to throw it down anyone else's throat, and also working with us on the same social justice aims.
Yeah, exactly. Were you raised in a religious household?
Interestingly, yes and no. Like, no, in the fact that my folks are not religious, and had no expectations we'd be religious. On the other hand, my sister and I went to a Catholic school for 10 years in California. It's really interesting because I look back, like I didn't love it. I wanted to go to public school by my 8th grade, was able to. But now that I do these cases and I see the types of public schools in the South that don't teach evolution, they teach abstinence only, they teach all this stuff. My Catholic school looks like a public school. It seems even more progressive than that. And so it propelled me, after I got a really egregious case across my desk about evolution, to actually thank my science teachers at my middle school. I found them on Facebook, and I just was like, 'cause I didn't know if they were like individual, like kind of anomalies that I got to learn about evolution and natural selection and all the kind of components that I saw challenged in the South. And both of them remembered me as that girl that was like outside protesting the frogs or doing something distracting, but also were like, oh my God, it's so fun to hear from you. So, and one of them is now like following my AHA videos, like Legal Tuesdays, and she's all about it. So it's cool to have connected over that. But yeah, so my religious background was like, I'm an atheist-ish. Like, I think my parents were like, just thought it was a good school. My grandma was like, all about it. But I would say it's good too, because I think if I went to public school out here, everyone's really agnostic. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. And like, so religion wouldn't be something I'd think about. And by the time I had only been really exposed to Catholic, through school, and then like a few Jewish friends on the periphery, and then everyone else just seemed like they weren't religious. I was like, wait, what? Like, there must be other religions. So when I went like on my own accord to take a community college class while in high school on world religions, and that I was like, oh my God, there's so many religions. Like, how can they all be true? But I think because the Catholic school had like, it gave me so much of a complex. Like, I was like, mass is creepy, this Jesus character, like one of my friend's brother had to do like be the Jesus in the Stations of the Cross, and we'd like emulate his death, and it was so morbid. And as an outsider in there, I had perspectives that I wouldn't have been able to have had I gone to public school. So not regretting it, and I had exposure, but almost still from an outsider.
Sure. I just heard you say AHA Tuesday legal.
Oh yeah. I do a little segment for the American Humanist Association called Legal Tuesdays, where I answer. I think we were on episode 35 yesterday. And it's just a short video where I answer. We get a lot of intake that we don't necessarily end up acting on, either because the person was, not willing to be a plaintiff, or because the issue was something that we couldn't, didn't rise to the level of action, but it was still an issue. And some of these were recurring. So we thought to do a video series and then ask folks, rather than just wait for them to come in, if they want to send us questions or put them in the comments. And I found that, people have asked some really good questions and some stuff that does come up a lot. And so.
Cool. So, Monica, we're heading down, last few minutes. And the question Well, one of the last questions I ask people who come on the channel is there a question you wanted me to ask you, but I didn't get around to it? Not about plugs or where people can find you online. Or was there a topic you wanted to talk about, but we just didn't get around to it?
That's a good one. I kind of think I tend to get asked like what people can do. Like if I'm speaking like usually at like more for chapters and affiliates, but it's something that I almost don't usually like getting that question because I usually feel pretty like helpless and like there's not much we can do. But I think that like I said, the more that I've thought, I don't know, were you going to ask me the question?
Oh, no, this is all about you and what you thought I think, or no, there's some kind of abstraction there that I'm getting lost in. But what would you want to talk about?
Okay. Yeah. So to answer my own question, the thing that I think people can do is tune in to the church-state separation violations going on, to speak with their theistic friends or religious friends about how, you know, how the history has played out where it does end up corrupting religion when government and religion go hand in hand, educating their friends about how like a lot of these cases result in a damage to religion, not to atheism, like to get greater stakeholders. Because I think it's high time that Christians, like the theistic friends we're talking about, kind of get looped in and feel like they're involved with church-state separation more than just everything else, because it's affecting them way more and more. And the one example I'll give is the ministerial exception cases that the Supreme Court decided last term. And what they ended up holding was that, because I was thinking of the Catholic school, that Catholic school teachers, you know, these are religious folks, can be fired outside of you know, even if their firing would normally violate the law, that the religious employer gets a privilege, gets an exemption from that based off of this convoluted reasoning that these folks might be akin to a minister, even though they're teaching math and science. So who loses in that? It's not the atheists. Atheists don't usually like to work at Catholic schools. It's the Catholic teachers, the average, your moms and dads of your neighborhood, that are getting screwed over by these church-state separation cases. So I think that an awareness of that, like, and people are surprised, like that kind of went under their heads a little. That could be your friend's mom that gets breast cancer. That's what happened. One of the women had breast cancer, had to take a leave of absence, and then got fired. And then she sued under the Disabilities Act. And she would have potentially won, except for the fact that there was this new Supreme Court decision saying, no, you could be like a minister, and therefore the church gets to do whatever the heck they want. So that's what people can do, is start informing others around them of why they should care.
I think that's great. I think that's great advice. Monica, thank you for coming on the channel. This has been an incredible, well, I find, and I hope everyone else has found this conversation be incredible too. I learned a lot of stuff. Where can people find you online?
I'm so bad at these questions too. You can find me at AmericanHumanist.org, I think. And then I'm just gonna put it in and then nonhumanrightsproject.org. Okay,
fantastic. And everyone, I'm going to throw in the links in the description. You can check them out. You can check out Monica Miller's full resume on one of the links I'm going to drop down there. Once again, thank you very much for coming on the channel.